Start in a couple minutes. Most people should be here already, but I just want to give us a little bit of time for any stragglers to join in. We're recording, excellent. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Apache OpenWhisk Tech Interchange meeting. So I'm the host for this edition. My name's Justin Horsall. I'd like to go through the calendar real quick for the agenda. I want to start up with a couple updates from different people. The security update, Kubernetes update, and OpenShift update, and then we'll go into some of the longer ones, including the website update and the update on the exciting news about Knative and how OpenWhisk has been playing in, and how some of our contributors have also been working on that as well. So I want to welcome everybody. Very happy to have you here today. So I'd like to really just kick it off and ask if let me see, is Roderick there? I should have double checked before I started talking, shouldn't I? Let me see, I don't see Roderick here yet. Okay, so let's go to, let me see, is Dave Grove here? No, oh, he's also not here yet. Okay, I guess that's maybe probably a good moment.
Davis here under D Grove.
Okay. I didn't see him. Thank you very much. So Dave, would you like to give us a Kubernetes update?
Sure. Yeah, just give a quick highlight of some of the things that are going on. So probably the most visible thing is we split into having two Helm charts. There's one Helm chart to deploy the core system, and there's another one to deploy the providers that's then organized into subcharts. So currently there's just the Kafka provider, but there's a PR from Daisy that should come in pretty soon for also deploying the alarm provider. So that gives people the flexibility to deploy the providers and the core system on different clusters if they want to. We had some nice community contributions in the last few weeks for things like deploying the Helm charts on top of the Google Kubernetes engine, and also for doing some fix-ups from upstream PRs while I was out on vacation. So that was great. As things change upstream, people in the community notice there are breakages and just fix the environment images, the environment variables and the images. So that was great. One other thing that changed that might be worth mentioning is I did some work about 2 weeks ago to refactor the way we use our Docker files to cut down to just having two sort of bespoke Docker files, one that runs a shell script that you load into as a config map, and one that runs an Ansible playbook that you load as a config map. And so let us get rid of a lot of the custom Docker images we're using for jobs. And that may be something that could be useful for OpenShift as well, and maybe we should try to push up into the core project. There's a notion of a Docker file that has everything it needs in it to run an arbitrary Ansible playbook that gets loaded on the side. It simplified a lot of my deployment stuff in OpenWhisk in the deployment part of the deployment.
Nice.
Those are the main things. Any questions, or you can just move on to the next topic.
Thank you so much. So let's check if Roderick has jumped in the meantime. Roderick, are you there?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, there you are. Excellent. Could you give us a security update?
I can. Can I share my screen?
Yes, of course. Let me stop sharing.
Okay, sorry, give me a second.
This thing works.
Okay, is it coming through?
Perfectly. Not for some of us.
Not for some of you. Still nothing?
I don't see a keynote that says report of a vulnerability was received from a security research team.
You don't see it? Okay.
How
So-
can I read it if I don't see it?
Is there anybody else who can't see it?
We can see it. You're good
Okay.
to go.
Thanks, Carlos. So this is an update on the CVEs that we issued last week or 2 weeks ago. And I thought I'd just sort of quickly walk you through sort of how it happened and what we did to sort of mitigate the issue. So sometime in early June, we got a report from a security research team that they had found a vulnerability with Apache OpenWhisk, and they provided us with an example of the vulnerability, how to exploit it, and the potential fix. This was from PureSec. And when we received the report, we acknowledged it a day later, and then we went off and did we researched the effort. So is that a chat for me? I can't see.
Now continue.
Okay. Thanks, Carlos. We researched it and then started addressing the issue. For people who weren't following the details, what this was essentially a vulnerability in the user code. So it's in user space. So a function that, for example, doesn't follow or apply basic security engineering is vulnerable, and an attacker could then exploit that vulnerability to do any number of bad or malicious things. And sort of the report was essentially one example of what an attacker could do. I did write a let me just switch really quickly, a blog post about this on Medium. I've posted the article in our Slack channel, but here's an example of a function that basically was along the lines of what we received. This is done in Node, but really what you should see here is there's this exec call, which is executing a system function. And so if you're doing this and you're not sanitizing your input, in this case, the parameter that's being received called string, your function is vulnerable. When you write serverless code, as a developer, we need to educate and make sure that people are aware that, you don't get to set aside security. You have to consider security and still apply best practices when you're working with serverless functions. And so in this example, imagine if you were able to send the payload, that's a normal payload as you expect in this function. I'm calling word count to count the number of words in a sentence. But you can just as easily, add the semicolon and then say sleep for 5 seconds or 5 minutes, or even worse, as you see on this line, fetch some malicious code from my malicious website and then execute that process. And there's many examples of such attacks where you can hijack parameters and then force the function to do things that it wasn't intending to do. Is that clear? Any questions?
Even just to add, and I think we should update this blog post rather to add the use case of I can replace an executable. Like for example, if I upload a zip file with a Perl or a Bash or the Swift code or a Docker action, this malicious code can replace /action/ I think was a sec or something, can also replace code, and then the next warm invocation gets reneat.
Right. So I didn't include that in my blog because I thought, I wanted to just get across the point that when you're writing serverless code, you should just be thinking about security as if you are writing any kind of server full code when you're making it exposed as an API endpoint on the web. Okay, that's not for me. So you need to keep them, or developers need to keep in mind that their functions are exposed on the web, and people can attack them in various ways. So in the particular issue that was reported, they didn't just execute a shell command, as Carlos was alluding to, because there is in fact a web server inside your container where your function is running. You can send a HTTP request to the container on localhost, and then have it reinit, basically reinitialize itself to where you can replace the user code. So it's not that you can just potentially exploit the user function to run alongside user code or run a malicious process in the background, you could just replace the code that's running in that container entirely. From the point of view of the OpenWhisk runtime, we sort of believe that the idea that the function should be immutable in that sense, and you shouldn't necessarily be allowed to do this. And so we went ahead and looked at all the runtimes, not just the one that was reported, and found that it was a Docker skeleton that was affected because it wasn't guarding against reinit, and also the PHP runtime. And in doing this, we fixed the reinit path in the skeletons, and thanks to Rob Allen for addressing the PHP one in particular. And to sort of make sure that all the runtime proxies are essentially presenting the same kind of uniform basic interface to the OpenWhisk system and providing a consistent interface for all user actions running inside a container, we added sort of a standard suite for all runtime proxies. And I wanted to just briefly bring that up. I can quickly find it. So it's called the basic action runner tests. And in this test suite, it tests for some basic things like, what should the container do if it receives no source, or a function that doesn't return JSON, or init called more than once, test entry point other than main, test echo, etc. So this is basically standard process for what we expect function runtimes to be able to do. And by adding a standard suite that all the runtimes should exercise, basically normalizes all the experience, and it makes it easier for us to sort of enforce various kinds of security-related protocols that we want the runtimes to adhere to. After implementing this trait, we went ahead and sort of made sure all the runtimes were upgraded to take advantage and run this basic test suite. It was sort of optional before, and sort of at this point, it's become part of every runtime, including our 2 new runtimes for Ruby and Ballerina. And in doing this, found a few bugs where the Swift runtime, I think one of the PHP versions had an issue with very large payloads.
Yeah, that's yeah.
Yeah. So in general, the vulnerability wasn't with OpenWhisk core itself. We always had assumed that the user function was malicious, and so the system itself isn't compromised, but it's the user function running inside a specific container that was, that if it was vulnerable and compromised, then basically that's bad news. And so we plugged that one hole, but in no way does that absolve users. We should make sure that developers understand that they're still on the hook for understanding security and securing their functions.
Yeah. Even you mentioned background. Somebody can put something in the background on every warm invoke. That background work will continue to happen. So
that's right. That's right. That's right. And so there was a bit of so we issued 2 CVEs because the fixes were in 2 different repositories. We thought that was cleanest. Even though there is no official Apache release, and that was sort of a point of discussion on the private mailing list, we decided in the best interest of the project, because of its maturity and the number of users that are out there, if there are people who are running Docker actions specifically and using one of the affected images, they should apply the patches and sort of bump up their Docker images. If you're building off of OpenWhisk and using the latest Docker images, which is the default in the repository, then you're automatically patched when you sort of grab the next update. And if you're using a hosted service, and I believe there was IBM Cloud Functions, in that case, automatically rolled out the fixes as well. So that's the story on the CVE. If there's questions, I can take them.
Thank you very much, Roderick. Just for time's sake, I'd like to move it along. So if you have any more questions, we can ask them at the end. So I'd like to go to Brendan McAdams. Are you there, Brendan?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Right. Could you do an OpenShift update, please?
Yeah, there's actually not much of an update at the moment. I'm working on, so we've done a bunch of work at Red Hat over the last 9 or 10 months on getting OpenWhisk running well. on OpenShift. And as part of that, we have scripts for deploying onto OpenShift. And from something that Dave Grove brought up is an item that I'm working on. We've had to build some custom images of the runtimes and other things to support certain things with OpenShift. So where we are now, we have created a repo under the Apache GitHub for where we've ported over our existing work on OpenShift and working on just getting the, not having custom build images to run that on is the sort of that next step. And so I'll talk to Dave as well on that because he brought that up. But getting it to the point that we have a repo here, you can use this to deploy OpenWhisk onto OpenShift, but ideally not also having a whole bunch of custom build images. I don't know if Ben, I think Ben's on. I don't know if he can add anything on that or not.
Yeah. As Brendan said, the main goal is to right now we had to customize certain images for OpenShift because that work is in the Apache repo now. We want to be able to pull those customizations out. It's mainly OpenShift doesn't allow images to run as root or specific users. So we have to put a couple of permission openings on some of the scripts laid down in the Docker file. So we hope to get those kind of merged and to get one set of images that works for Kubernetes and OpenShift across the board. We'll start with that based on the same base OS that's currently in Kubernetes. And then so that way, just using the default upstream OpenWhisk images, you can deploy to OpenShift. That's kind of our next goal. And there's also, that ties into work of getting the CI green for the OpenShift repo because there's some stuff right now that with a move to Apache that doesn't translate over yet.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
I was
Yeah,
looking for
you
the
have
CI. When you say modifications to images, are those controller and invoker you're talking about, or you're talking about the action runtimes like Node.js?
That's a great question. We made slight modifications to most images, not only controller and Invoca, action runtimes, also some things to
I'm looking in the repo. It looks like alarms, catalog, couch, and the runtimes. We need to figure out the permissions so that we don't have to keep pushing this.
Right.
So that
and
fork and own. Anyway, we can discuss it later.
Yeah, the goal is to get the Apache repo deploying OpenWhisk on OpenShift using the upstream Apache images so that we don't have to push a whole separate set of images, right? And so that's kind of the next step is to figure out that delta and get rid of it.
Cool. Anybody have anything more to add to that? No? Okay. Thank you very much, Brendan and Ben. Now, actually, I'd like to turn it over to Matt and Preetri for a website update. Yes, there it is.
Thanks, Justin. So, Pretty and I have been, as people know, 2 weeks ago we showed some early work, and I think we're at a point today where we're actually going to be able to submit the PR today, and I'm showing you what we have now. So basically, going back, our goal was to modernize the website, make it working, make it work with simple use of existing information, so we don't have redundant things in the website. Leverage the markdown we have in the repos. Leverage CWiki and other resources, remove cartoonish graphics that were actually graphics we didn't have licenses for, and to draw some affinity to Kubernetes and other modern projects in their look and feel. And of course, we wanted to also curate all the information that we could find and basically make sure that the website was a good reference point and launching point for all types of roles. So Pretty spent an inordinate amount of time on the documentation page, So basically, all the information is lossless. Everything was the old site is there. We just eliminated redundancies and modernized and updated all the information to the latest to reflect the latest code base and CLIs and parameters and things like that. As we added information and pulled things in, we decided we wanted the site to have a good entry point for 3 roles for operators, developers, and contributors. That if they wanted to, they could go to this site to understand what they needed to do to get started, what the prerequisites were, what their options were. And we actually got a interactive menu here on the side, so you can actually go to any task that you want to. We brought the examples in line for some of the basic tooling and functions getting started on all the different types of runtimes and tools and things like that. And we link heavily then back to the repos for more information. We have any number of issues opened already that we're going to migrate to when we submit the PR of where we want to take it further. Since we have a good place to get people excited about OpenWhisk and all the various code and repos and tooling we have, that we want to make sure the handoff is good. When we go to a repo, the readmes or the wiki and things are sound and the information there is accurate as well. And we have also lots of follow-up we would like to do in terms of automation. We've incorporated a lot of plugins in Jekyll to we actually can take Markdown, suck it in, and put it in here. Thanks to James Thomas for updating the external resources repo, curating that with us. It's our goal is that we can create small snippets of Markdown lists and things that we can bring them in, or code samples. We can actually suck them in dynamically. The website, that's what we'd like to do in automation. We added the downloads page as well. We have a community page, so we have a single place where you can get all information about community. I added the IBM logo and the neighbor logo as Dom approved and asked for on the dev list. So all that's there. Feel free to, we'll submit the PR, feel free to comment on the PR. And Freddie and I would like to keep working, and thanks to Roderick and others for giving us some early feedback after our showing last week or 2 weeks ago. We're going to pay attention to this space for the next couple weeks, Freddie and I, to make sure that all the comments, all the issues that are open and concerns are addressed as we move over to the new look and feel. And this has been verified against all different devices. It works on all browsers, works on all screen sizes, etc. So again, thanks to Pretty. She spent tons of time in documentation page, making sure it was accurate, basically giving you enough to understand before you jumped off on a link what you're going to get when you click the link. We wanted, like I said, a guided experience, so we have lots of inline examples. We have some redundancy about to where we send you to, but that's intentional. We actually have some things we'd like to do, and we have collapsible areas in the screen, so we intend to kind of refine the documentation page to kind of be able to say, if you're interested in this topic, click here, and we'll expand it. If you're interested in Python, you're not interested in Java, we shrink those things down. That's one of the things we'd like to work on as a subsequent PR. Any questions? Any place you want me to click or look at?
Can you go back to the homepage just so that we see what people see when they first land?
Yeah, so I created some new original graphics and images to reflect the current runtimes, the current deployments. If you want, Ben and Brendan, you approve, we can add OpenShift if you like as well. I still maintain 3 old school graphics I have not had time to replace. So if anybody's an artist out there has ideas of what the graphics should look like, especially for scaling and optimal utilization, I can put my limited talents to the task and try to realize those ideas, but appreciate any help from those who want to jump in and help us once we merge this PR.
This main page should have, I don't know what create your local playground is, but it should have the main 3 links to the documentation for developers, operators.
We do. It's a guided experience. So
it's not up to click documentation to get started. That's all. Just a small thing. That paragraph that you show in the documentation, like the first one, would be good to have in the main page somewhere. And the other thing, at least for me, it's difficult to read kind of a blue font on grayish background. At least for me, it's difficult to read. But that's just stylish things, CSS. I wish it tweak.
Yeah. So I'll try to keep those in mind and open them as issues and address those. The goal on the main page, we want to have a balance between getting people excited and create links to. We don't want redundant information, so if there's a way we can incorporate extra things, like you're saying, on the main page without bogging people down, and bringing redundant information, that'd be great.
Yeah. 3.
Matt, can you show this page where this Docker Compose is there? Are we mentioning Vagrant there also?
We just want to mention all the repos where we have a deployment option.
Yes, it has Vagrant as well.
Yeah, because I'm seeing lots of issues reported on the Docker Compose GitHub. Yeah, I think it's not that stable. So probably we should position the Vagrant as the first one, maybe, because that we know is the safest to get up and running on any Windows or any OS.
Yeah, these are comments we'd like. Our philosophy is that as long as we have the repo and it's named Incubator OpenWhisk, it's supported. As long as we open up under Apache, it's under Apache domain. So if it's not being supported, we should work on the dev list to either and the developers to get it fixed or decide to remove it.
I think the point is different. It's just a matter of ordering. But
yeah,
it's a matter of ordering. Okay.
Yeah, Docker Compose. If you're a Linux or Windows user and try to go to Docker Compose, it doesn't work.
Only work for Mac. You had a comment. I think we just pretty much discussed this. I think she indicated that Docker Compose seemed to be the easiest and easiest.
Yeah. So the Vagrant. Yeah, it says. I have tried many times on my Mac, and it says Vagrant is not up to date, or it takes a long time to. So that's why I kept the Vagrant last. But we can change the order depending on.
We could also add in recommended for Windows or recommended for Mac or something like that. But I think this is good conversation for the pull request.
Yeah, we can discuss it later.
Yeah, we expect lots of people to have commentary, and like I said, Prerna will be around for the next 2 weeks in terms of allotting for time to address and fix all comments.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Any more questions about this? I still have a couple more minutes reserved for this.
The only other thing I would say is where it says create your local playground, there's a project I don't know if you've heard of called Katacoda that we've used on the OpenShift side. So that it's not for a local playground, but it's a way where you can click a button and drop people into an environment where it can have OpenWhisk deployed for them already, and so then they just drop into an interactive tutorial of how to interact with OpenWhisk, and it's a real environment. It lasts for about an hour, right? So it's not for long-term use. It's purely for, hey, I'm interested in this. Let me play around with it and decide if then I want to commit to actually installing it.
Yeah, it's very good. I have used it in the Red Hat developer website blog, and it's very good. I took a quick look to want to have that in our websites, but I didn't find a way to get started, or it was free, or how to maintain it. If somebody from Red Hat can help with that, finding like how do we get it to use it? That's I got blocked there because I didn't know it was how to get it working.
Yeah, so the big thing is we need something we can reliably point people to, that we have some control over, and Apache will approve us using. That's the big issue.
Okay. Well, it's something we can look into that and see what the requirements are.
Yeah, I know. One of our biggest, wish list items since I joined the project at the very beginning was having a playground, and we've been trying. We've had different forays and attempts at this, but we've never succeeded at getting a hosted playground or hosted demo site or a way to try things out. So we'd love some help in that area.
That framework or tool looks awesome. The Katacoda is very easy to do, and I saw the examples, but I couldn't figure out how to use it free for open source. That's all. For open source project.
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, either. Red Hat has some kind of agreement, but I know it's free to create scenarios, so we can track that down and see how the open source project. I think like Kubernetes, for example, has scenarios there. So somehow they're able to get that going.
Yeah, fundamentally, you know, we've had a number of people think about donations, and that's what Apache likes. That's a preferred model, is if you can get some account or something, they prefer some donation where they can admin in one or two different ways.
All right, thank you very much for that update. I would like to turn it over to Ben and Marcus for an update on Knative. I think the K is silent. I'm not quite sure.
Silent.
Maybe you can explain it for us, Ben.
It's Knative.
Yeah, the K used to be silent. It's no longer silent.
Okay, excellent. Well, if you could give us an update on what's going on there.
Sure. Let me share my screen actually, and I'll show you just a brief overview of Knative. Not Katacoda. All right, can you see that? This is the Knative docs repo.
I can see it.
All right. So there's pronunciation right there in the repo now, Knative. So essentially Knative is, the high level goal is to create a set of building blocks to make serverless style workloads run better on Kubernetes. So there's nothing in Knative that's relevant outside of the Kubernetes space really for OpenWhisk. But on top of Kubernetes, it provides three main components, which they call build, eventing, and serving. And the build is something that OpenWhisk doesn't do today, at least not in the Apache version, taking source code and generating, a jar file or generating a zip archive or whatever, right? That's up to the developer. So Knative adds a concept of building to Kubernetes. Eventing is very similar. Think of it like OpenWhisk triggers, rules, and feeds. Knative eventing is heavily inspired by OpenWhisk triggers, rules, and feeds, it looks like, just from the code and from comments I've had talking to other people. But essentially it aims to take those kind of concepts and bring them into Kubernetes natively. And then serving is the ability in Kubernetes to scale resources down to 0 when they're idle, activate them back up from 0 to 1, and also some more intelligent auto-scaling compared to the default Kubernetes auto-scaler. So this is kind of a picture they have. What's relevant for OpenWhisk is just that Knative aims to make Kubernetes a better place to run serverless. So the serverless on Kubernetes space is very much going to involve Knative in some way, right? So you've got the major Kubernetes serverless projects all participating in some level or one level or another with Knative. So that's Project Riff from Pivotal, you've got Kubeless, you've got OpenFaz, you've got people, there's not official OpenWhisk participation as far as the Apache project, but there's people that contribute to OpenWhisk that also participate in Knative. So that's kind of the high level, what it is. Now, as far as how it's relevant to OpenWhisk, it really comes down to deciding in OpenWhisk how deeply integrated do we want to be with Kubernetes or not. And if we want deeper integration with Kubernetes, Knative is probably the right way to do that in the future. Right now, Knative is still very early, but long term, that's where I expect the majority of the innovation to happen in the serverless and Kubernetes space, specifically the serverless on Kubernetes space. I expect the innovation to happen in Knative. I can stop sharing my screen for a minute. That's just a high-level view. Marcus, is there anything else you want to add before I go into any other details?
No, that pretty much all of that made sense. And in terms of integration, you probably will show your KWSK prototype that you've built. But just a disclaimer from my side, the design proposal that I put out like 2 or 3 weeks ago, as I already said on the email thread regarding Knative, I cannot claim that this is not inspired by making both systems interact more deeply with each other. So I have a slight revision of that proposal pending. I also have to include all the stuff that was mentioned on the dev list on the proposal itself. but with the revision that I put in, I can more clearly draw a picture and show you how the architecture that I proposed would also work with what using Knative underneath more in a more integrated fashion, as Ben mentioned.
Right.
And I have a couple of questions. In terms of OpenWhisk and Knative, as you were talking about it, have you thought a little bit about why OpenWhisk on Knative is potentially better than OpenWhisk just on Kubernetes by itself?
Sure. So the reality is today, as things exist today, it's probably not. There's a caveat there that OpenWhisk and Kubernetes today, it can be mean a number of different things. The most performant way to deploy OpenWhisk and Kubernetes today is to deploy it on Kubernetes, but have it talk directly to the underlying Docker daemon with the invoker agent stuff. And that is, so that's deploying on Kubernetes, but kind of reaching around Kubernetes and directly talking to Docker, right? The world where I deploy, the environments where I'm working with OpenWhisk, we don't have Docker. Docker doesn't exist. It's Cryo, or I don't know if it's CRI. There's other implementations of container runtimes that are not Docker. So I can't talk directly to Docker. Everything needs to go through the Kubernetes API. So in a world like that, where Kubernetes does not necessarily mean Docker anymore, if you're talking purely Kubernetes API, now we start to have to worry more about the Kubernetes API performance when it comes to scheduling and when it comes to scaling up and scaling down. So I expect Knative is going to drive innovation in the Kubernetes space, but today performance is not better on Knative or anything like that, right? The goal here would purely be a future play, not a let's do this today and increase performance kind of a deal.
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that. I think you can distinguish two bits here, and one is the performance of a serverless platform, and the second is the abstractions that a serverless platform gives you. And I think the thing that we aim to get out of Knative as a first step is increased performance on Kubernetes at some point, if and only if what we just said becomes true and Knative drives innovation into Kubernetes and it all gets faster than it is today, and all of these kinds of caveats. It might make sense here to lay out the fundamental differences, and there are some, between OpenWhisk and Knative. And the most apparent in terms of performance is that Knative, like the whole build CRD and serving CRD, is built around deploying images and deploying containers. Whereas in OpenWhisk, we have the notion of we deploy source code, basically. We can also deploy containers, but to make things really fast, we deploy source code. And that enables us to build what we all know as stem cell containers or pre-warmed containers. So we can pre-provision a lot of Node.js runtimes and then inject and run, and that gets the code start latency down quite a lot. As the design stands today in Knative, and actually I think in other Kubernetes-based serverless platforms as well, they usually build their things around, I have this deployment, and then some kind of auto-scaling logic scales that deployment up and down, and that inherently prevents you from doing stuff like I just mentioned, like stem cell containers and then injecting code and everything. That is, of course, a snapshot view, but just to line out the differences. Right. So so the point about building containers per function, I think Ben also raised it. That is fundamentally different. And with OpenWhisk, you're much more aware that you're working with functions and not containers, even though that's, everybody knows you can deploy a container. So there is a why question there. Is why do you want to manage containers versus just functions and base images to be considered at some point? And then how do you manage all the images themselves as in a large multi-tenant environment, you can easily have thousands of images, and there's going to be some consolidation somebody has to do somewhere to deal with that. Another point I thought maybe worth making is, it feels like just reading the documentation and doing a little bit of the analysis, firsthand myself, is that OpenWhisk in a lot of ways is already what Knative wants to be for Kubernetes. And I wonder that as we drive some of the concepts, ideas, and implementation through Knative, because it seems obvious some of that is going to happen. Is there a way to make sure that the OpenWhisk community and the project is recognized for that in some way, and helping to sort of increase the OpenWhisk Knative collaboration in a very public way, if that indeed happens? Basically, if events and triggers, and I think Knative calls them flows and rules, are very much synonymous in some way. Is there proper kind of pedagogy or other kinds of credit that should happen in terms of just making things visible that benefit the OpenWhisk community as well? I hope that kind of makes sense. It's a little rambly, but feels like there's a lot of places where OpenWhisk is quite ahead, and making sure that as we influence sort of the future of other technologies, that community is recognized for its work.
I don't know the answer to the recognition, but it is true that, for example, things that map pretty much one-to-one in OpenWhisk. OpenWhisk trigger maps to a Knative channel. OpenWhisk rule maps to a Knative subscription. OpenWhisk feed maps very closely to a Knative feed. These are their eventing concepts. So their eventing concepts are very similar. They have some other concepts that are a little different as well. And to your other point is that Knative is a set of building blocks, and OpenWhisk is a complete platform, including the user-facing tools, API, and concepts. And so Marcus alluded to this earlier. One thing I've been prototyping, which is just in a new project from scratch for now, to be able to iterate quickly, is what if we kept compatibility with all the existing OpenWhisk controller API and function runtime and functions, right? So we have a function runtime that runs the same functions that OpenWhisk has today. And you can use the same Whisk CLI, you can use the same tooling and integrations and all the same concepts, but everything runs completely on Knative. And that's something I've been prototyping. I'll put some links in the chat I've got a couple like ASCII cinemacast, but essentially using the default Whisk CLI, I'm able to create and invoke actions that actually are Knative resources underneath. I'm able to create triggers and rules, fire triggers, and have it call those actions, that kind of stuff. So this is a prototype of figuring out what would it look like if OpenWhisk was the face of Knative as far as the developer was concerned. So like I said, I'll put some links in the chat to that.
I think maybe one last point for me on this is, Knative and Kube are tied together, and Kubernetes might very well be eating the world, but there are other deployments of OpenWhisk that aren't Kube-based, and I don't know to what extent that needs to continue to be supported or not. I think as a community we'll need to consider that. Mesos is important, and we know that there are enterprises that deploy on VMs even still. So having that flexibility within OpenWhisk to truly run anywhere, I think is pretty powerful still.
Yeah, Daisy, can you go?
I want to add one point of.
Sorry. Go ahead.
So I'd like to add one point of Knative. I think Knative has close integration with ELK, Grafana, Prometheus, and Istio, and all these open source projects make Knative have better monitoring and traffic management. So I think if OpenWhisk can, whether integrate with Knative or whether learn from Knative, we can improve our dashboard, monitoring dashboard, and the traffic routing capabilities.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think other FAS projects like OpenFAS, for example, has I think done a nice job of integrating very simple UI plus Prometheus and dashboarding. And from an OpenWhisk perspective, we sort of left that off developer experience and sort of felt that there's lots of tools out there to integrate with, but maybe left a large chunk of the last step for end users or providers to deal with. And if you can leverage that natively from another platform, I think it helps the experience.
Yeah. So the point about other platforms is a good one. I'm not sure from my standpoint, from an OpenWhisk and Knative standpoint, I'm not sure how much OpenWhisk can take advantage of Knative without being all in on Knative, like exclusively on Knative. And that's something that will have to be figured out. Is there anything OpenWhisk can use in Knative? How can it take advantage of it if it doesn't change a lot of its internals specifically to be for Knative?
I do believe this is a matter of where do we draw lines and where how do we define our abstraction layers? Because personally I strongly believe that you can build an execution layer and a, so to say, userland abstraction layer on top. Let's say our API today is basically just an abstraction layer on some execution layer underneath. And that enables you to switch out Knative and or Mesos and or other cube-based deployments. As I said, I have a revision of my proposal. I think I work on that shortly to make that point more clear. But I think, and even Alex Ellis from OpenFAS alluded to the fact that OpenFAS seems to be able to swap backends as well to a certain extent. He said something like this and that backend looks promising as well, as opposed to Knative. So I think from a community standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to keep that door open for us.
I think I agree with you, Marcus. I think though there is as we focus more on top of Kubernetes and Knative, and if a significant fraction of the active community goes that direction, there will be a sort of a lag in some of the Scala-based components as we no longer need them in the long term. And so that'll be something to have to balance, that as we sort of replace various pieces of our control plane with more Knative implementations, with Kubernetes implementations, the other ones that are only used for Mesos or Docker Compose may languish, and we'll have to figure out how to deal with that.
Right. And there's kind of what Marcus said, and there's also the concept of what if OpenWhisk's APIs and toolings all became kind of the standard for deploying functions and interacting with Knative,
right?
But it was still Knative under the covers. Like, what would that mean for OpenWhisk as a project? Would OpenWhisk still be one project that's got like the API layer that then has a Knative backend and then the other OpenWhisk backend, or would like the OpenWhisk CLI and tooling and all the interactions and integrations and packages around it, everything that talks to controller basically, become some different project that then talks to either Knative or OpenWhisk? Like there's those kind of discussions that would have to take place.
Right.
Because Knative is missing that level of integration and tooling that OpenWhisk provides today.
Yeah, and it should obviously be OpenWhisk because I think we did it right.
Yeah, we have the right idioms. I've been involved with the Knative eventing group at least, and some of the concepts, and I try to see if they would adopt some of their terminology, but they choose different ones. But I think at that discussion, we were spending a lot of time of what to name things, but abstractions implementation of having like an event source, an event adapter, a channel, a boss, and a target. We call it a target. We call it a function. It could be the action that you want to run as subscription. It matches the idioms of OpenWhisk. So I think that's I think we have the market there, and we should protect that
Mindshare. You mean Mindshare?
Yeah, Mindshare. Mindshare. And the other thing I was looking, before even Knative, I was looking into implementing the eventing system in OpenWhisk. Like we start calling the same things, the eventing system, trigger providers, in a way that can scale easier for an operator rather than managing a single microservice that can manage all triggers. So I was also looking into leveraging Kubernetes auto-scaling, where I can assign an event source or a trigger to a single pod. And then if those event sources are hot, or there's a lot of events coming from one trigger, leveraging Kubernetes to auto scale, because now, I don't know if people were aware, we're in IBM Functions, we are adopting Kubernetes more, we're deploying Kubernetes. So in terms of operator cost efficiencies, I was looking into leveraging more of those, instead of doing by hand, like with VMs, do the auto scaling and the load balancing across my cluster to handling these triggers. And like Marcus said, there's abstractions that we can draw lines, and the eventing system is something that we can draw a line where I can deploy the trigger providers or this system, event source and the boss and the channel and those abstractions with Kubernetes and Knative, and then the target becomes a entry point into the OpenWhisk activator or invocation path. So just a little bit of background on where other things I'm looking into, at least for Knative and OpenWhisk story.
All right, well, exciting stuff. We're running out of time. Do Ben or Marcus want to add some wrap up, or have you said everything that you want to say?
I think there's going to be an ongoing discussion. All these pieces we talked about, we need to start thinking about long term how to maintain OpenWhisk as its thing, as Roderick said, like as the thing with the mind share, but also be able to adapt to taking advantage of these things. So I think that's more just melliness discussions, proposals, future topics. But something to think about is what kind of abstractions can we add to OpenWhisk to be able to better take advantage of these kind of things without losing OpenWhisk in the process, essentially.
Very cool. Thank you so much. That was really great. That was really informative. Good discussions there. Now, let me see, something else that I think we should keep in mind. Vincent has been posting about it on the mailing list. I think there's another roll call for votes when it comes to release 0.9.0. So judging by Vincent's post, it's time for us to vote again. And then I would like to find my successor for the next 2 weeks, for the meeting in the next 2 weeks. So is there anybody that would like to take over my job and moderate? It's not really that hard. It's actually quite fun. Yes, so, don't be shy. Wave, anybody?
Sorry, my video's up. August 15th, right?
Let me double check. 2
weeks, yeah.
2 weeks, 15th, yeah.
I'll be happy to do it.
Thank you very much, Ben. That's perfect. So I'll write you down for next 2 weeks. If you haven't done it before, either I or Matt can help you out with it. And then let me see. We have 5 more minutes left. Is there anybody that would like to add anything or ask any questions or something like that? Now is the moment to do that. No, that's it. Any more questions about security? Knative, as we can now call it, or the website, or anything else really? No. Okay. Well, then, in that case, thank you all for joining. It was an absolute pleasure. See you all in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Cheers. Bye.